On a cold Sunday at church, an old dog named Grace is allowed inside one last time. She walks beside the aging caretaker, nails clicking on the floor, eyes fixed on the flag-draped box. People expect her to curl up under a pew like any tired family dog. Instead, Grace stays in the aisle, tail low, ears turned toward the flag, as if she has waited years for this moment. Around her, people shift, unsure why the sight of her makes their chests tighten. For years, he has believed some memories are safer locked in folded letters and folded flags. Now, as the chapel grows still and the family rises, Grace steps toward the box, draws in a long breath, and everyone holds theirs. The chapel at the edge of town liked to talk after dark. Old beams shifted, stained glass sighed when the temperature dropped, and the floorboards remembered every wedding and farewell. Frank Miller told himself that was all he was hearing as he turned off the last light. Tonight, though, the sound came again before he reached the switch. A light, nervous click on the wood near the front pews. Too quick to be a branch. Too familiar to be the building settling. He froze, hand hovering, feeling his heart stutter once in his chest. A draft slipped under the double doors and brushed his ankles, carrying the faintest trace of something warm, lived in. Not quite dust and not quite rain. He rubbed at the chill rising on his arms. Just age. He muttered. Just you getting jumpy. Old man. When he stepped down the center aisle, the air felt uneven. One pocket cool, the next strangely warmer, as if something breathing had just moved through and given way. His palm skimmed the back of a pew. A single short hair clung to his skin, pale against his weathered fingers. He flicked it away, more quickly than the gesture required. Light from the street lamp outside slid through the stained glass in faded colours and pooled near the altar. In that soft wash, a shadow seemed thicker along the side wall, like something curled under the hymn racks. The faintest jingle answered the silence, a whisper of metal against metal, then stopped. Frank's shoulders tightened. The chapel had no loose chains, no dangling fixtures anymore. Head fixed them all, one by one, since taking the caretaker job after retiring from the mail route. Wind, he insisted to himself, though the air was still. His breath felt loud in his ears. For a second he imagined footsteps behind him, steady and light, matching his own stride. When he turned, there was only empty aisle and the wavering reflection of his shape in the glossy floor. He reached the doors and paused. A soft scrape moved just behind him, close to the front row, followed by a slow exhale, almost a sigh. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled. He thought of going back, then shook his head. Curiosity. He decided, could wait. Outside, the night was crisp, the gravel path silvered with frost. Under the porch light, he noticed a line of small impressions leading from the street to the top step, each one rounded and deliberate, not made by shoes. The pattern ended right at the threshold, as if something had paused there. He bent, the old ache in his knees complaining, and touched one of the marks. It was shallow, but the ice there had melted slightly and refrozen, leaving a faint rim. Whatever had been here had warmth in it, and weight. He straightened slowly, feeling a flutter low in his chest. Tracks, he whispered. Maybe from earlier. But he knew he had swept that stoop before sunset, watched it dry clear. The thought that he was misremembering unsettled him more than the prints. Forgetting things scared him in a way creaks and shadows never could. Before locking up, he stood in the doorway and listened. From inside came a gentle shifting, then a subdued thump near the front. Not loud, not threatening, just a presence that had been there before and meant to be there again. Whatever it was, it kept coming back. He closed the doors, the latch catching with a solid click. Yet the feeling followed him down the path. Beneath the big flag on the pole by the road, the night seemed to hold its breath. Something had chosen this place, he thought, and it was not finished with its visits. By the third morning, Frank knew it wasn't his imagination. The frost on the chapel steps held the story plainly. A double line of prints looping in from the street, circling once near the doors, and then lingering in one spot, as if whoever left them had stood there listening in. He crouched again, the cold seeping through his jeans. Each print showed 4 neat ovals and a deeper point where something hard had pressed in. Between them, tiny scratches marked where nails had scraped, careful and controlled, not wild. He felt that same odd warmth along his arm. Inside, the air carried a faint tang of old leaves and something musky, mixed with the usual beeswax and hymnbook paper. The front pew on the right had a few more pale hairs on the cushion. He pinched one and held it to the light, surprised by how soft it felt. Near the side door, he found the small metal bowl he kept tucked behind the organ for visiting musicians. It had been nudged out into the open, a faint ring of dried water at the bottom. Beside it lay a single, small, damp mark on the floor, shaped like a careful step. When he swept, the broom's bristles knocked against the wooden box at the front, the one the committee had brought in yesterday. It waited on a low platform, draped in a flag still folded, ready to be unfurled over it for Sunday's service. Just touching it made his throat tighten. The lid had been polished until it glowed under the stained glass. Seeing it there, even empty, pressed against the back of his eyes with old memories. Another flag. Another box. Years ago. He swallowed and felt his heart pound a little harder than the quiet room warranted. A soft tap echoed from behind him. He turned quickly and caught, for the first time, motion rather than shadow. A shape slipped between two pews, low and sure-footed, moving with the stiffness of age, but the precision of long habit, heading toward the side aisle. He held his breath. The shape paused where the sun reached across the floor, and he saw the curve of a greying muzzle, the arc of a bat, a tail carried low but steady. A collar glinted once at the throat, tag-shifting with each careful breath before the figure faded back into shade. The click of nails on wood sounded again, heading toward the rear. Somehow, the sound eased something in him. It was not the skittering of something wild, but the measured step of a creature that understood rooms like this and had walked them often. Frank's chest tightened with a recognition he couldn't yet name. His mind tried to scramble back through years of faces and four-legged companions, through photos on mantels and frames in drawers. It landed on one image and stopped, but the thought was too tender to touch yet. He followed slowly, not wanting to spook the visitor. At the back of the chapel, the side door stood ajar by an inch, though he was certain had shut it. In the narrow gap, he saw a flash of pale fur and the gentle sway of a tail before it slipped into the morning. On the stoop, the prints were fresher, sharper, leading away toward the road and then angling off toward the low houses beyond the oak trees. He watched them fade into the brightening light and felt his heartbeat steady, even as a new unease settled in. "I know you," he murmured, though the street was empty. The notion felt impossible and inevitable all at once. If it truly was the same old companion his family had once known, then there was a question hanging in the crisp air. Why had she chosen this place? And why now? Long before he turned in his postal bag and picked up the chapel keys, the house on Maple Street had been loud with boots and laughter. His son, Daniel, filled it that way, bringing stories from training, from dusty bases, from places Frank only saw on the evening news. One autumn visit, Daniel arrived with a lean, bright-eyed youngster at his side, her coat a soft mix of gold and cream, her ears too large for her head. She trotted into the kitchen like she'd been born there, nose twitching at the scent of coffee and frying onions. "She's helping me sleep," Daniel had said, scratching the smooth head. They say a calm companion can keep the worst of the memories at bay. The pup leaned into his leg like it was the only solid thing in the room, eyes flicking between father and son as if memorizing their shapes. At first, Frank kept his distance. Head dealt with plenty of neighborhood creatures on his mail route, barkers at fences, jumpers at windows, but this one moved differently. She watched him, not in challenge, but in quiet study, as if waiting for a cue from the man she followed. Nights, when the house went still, he would hear them in the living room. Daniel talking low, sometimes laughing, sometimes pausing mid-sentence. Then a soft whine, a rustle of fur against denim, a gentle thump as the companion settled her weight against him, steady as a heartbeat. He pretended not to listen. Yet those sounds stitched themselves into his understanding of his son's changed life. Here, in this ordinary small-town house, something wordless was standing guard over the parts of Daniel he couldn't reach with phone calls or casseroles. When deployment orders came again, the air around the kitchen table turned heavy. Daniel hesitated before speaking, one hand resting on the smooth head beside his chair. "Shall stay with you a while," he said. "Until I'm back. She already knows the way around town." The first night without Daniel, the house felt too big. The companion paced between the front door and the dark hallway, then settled at the foot of Frank's bed with a sigh that sounded too human. Her presence was both comfort and reminder, a living line back to the one who'd gone. On Sundays, Frank had started bringing her along when he went to help at the chapel, long before the job became official. She would lie near the back, eyes tracking him as he adjusted hymn numbers, her ears flicking whenever the bell rang or the flag outside caught the wind. Then came the knock every family in a town like theirs dreads. A uniform at the door, hat in hand, words spoken gently but still too sharp. Somewhere in the telling, a folded flag appeared on the table, its white stars catching the afternoon sun and reflecting in his blurred vision. The companion sat so straight beside him through it all that he thought she might shatter. When the officer rose to leave, she followed him to the door, then turned back to the empty hallway, her nails clicking once on the threshold like a question. For a while after, their days fell into a quiet routine of shared absence. She would curl beside his armchair, eyes half closed, always waking when he stood, always checking the front door as if someone might walk in whistling. The mailbox stayed light, but his chest felt heavy. Then one summer storm rolled in faster than the forecast. Thunder cracked too close, and the lights flickered. A flash lit the windows, and in that moment of confusion, the back door banged open. By the time he reached it, rain blowing in, the yard held only fading paw marks in the mud. He searched the neighborhood, called the vet, thumbed flyers onto bulletin boards. People saw a blur here, a shadow there, but she never settled. Over the years, stories of an aging, four-legged wanderer came and went around town, but always from just far enough away. The absence in his house stayed. Now, standing in the chapel with the empty flag-draped box waiting for Sunday, Frank felt time fold in on itself. The pale hairs on the pew, the prints in the frost, the familiar weight behind those soft steps, all of it pointed back to that storm and the shape that had vanished into it. He arrived early the next morning, before the sun had fully cleared the pines. The air inside still held the night's cool, but the spot near the front pew where He'd seen the movement carried a faint warmth, like a chair just vacated. He laid his palm there without thinking. Outside, he propped the side door open with a brick, then walked away as if He'd forgotten to close it. On the stoop, he set down an old metal bowlhead found in the closet, filling it halfway from a jug he kept in the truck. Beside it, he placed half a biscuit. Then he sat in the second row, hands folded over the ridge of his knee, and pretended to read the hymnal. The chapel's quiet settled around him. After a while, the softest scrape sounded at the threshold. Then a pause, as if someone were checking whether the invitation was real. The steps inside were slower this time, measured, each one landing with the careful deliberation of joints that had seen years. He kept his eyes on the hymn numbers. The faint jingle of a tag drifted up the aisle. A presence stopped beside him, close enough that he could feel breath on his sleeve. He lowered his gaze. There she was. Her muzzle, once bright, was frosted almost entirely white now. The fur along her back had thinned, showing the line of her spine, but her eyes were the same steady amber He'd tried not to think about for years. Recognition hit like a sudden chord. Grace, he whispered, giving voice at last to the name Daniel had chosen. Her ears flicked at the sound, and she leaned closer, bumping his knuckles with her nose. The old collar still circled her neck, the tag worn thin, the engraving soft from countless days of wear. For a moment they simply sat, two aging creatures in the half-light, listening to the building breathe. He felt something tight in his chest loosen, and with it came a trickle of guilt for all the days He'd given up on expecting this moment. Yet here she was, smelling faintly of roads and fields. She moved away, nails ticking softly as she stepped down the aisle. Instead of heading for the side door, she went straight to the front, stopping before the low platform where the flag waited to be spread. Her posture straightened, tail lifting slightly, as if she'd taken her place on invisible duty. Frank's throat thickened. He joined her, standing at her side. "You remember," he murmured. "You always did know what that cloth meant." Reaching down, he let his hand rest lightly on her back, feeling the rhythm of her breathing. It steadied his own. The committee chair, Mrs. Green, poked her head in the door then. startled to see them. Her gaze went from Frank to the silvered companion, and her eyes widened. Is that? I thought she was long gone. Her voice softened. He used to bring her to the early service, didn't he? Frank nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Grace's ears twitched at the familiar cadence of another voice, but her eyes never left the box. The flag's fabric shifted slightly in a stray draft, and she watched it as if waiting for a signal that hadn't been given yet. Well, need to talk to the family. Mrs. Green said gently. About Sunday. The unspoken question hung there. Should this old friend be inside when the town gathered? When the flag was placed and the words were said again? Fear of stirring old grief met the clear intention in Grace's stance. As Mrs. Green left, Frank stayed where he was, fingers resting lightly in the wiry fur. Grace glanced up at him, then back to the platform, as if reminding him that some invitations had already been accepted long before anyone asked permission. He understood then. She hadn't just returned. She had come back to stand a post. All week, the town moved in slow circles around the coming service. The bulletin at the diner announced the memorial for those who had served and never truly left people's stories. The florist brought arrangements to the chapel, their scent of lilies and pine mingling with old wood. Frank polished the pew ends until his shoulders ached. Each swipe of the cloth a way to keep his mind busy. Grace shadowed him now, no longer a mystery, but a quiet presence. Her steps followed at a distance, nails tapping a soft counterpoint to his work, never wandering far. At home, he found himself talking aloud more than before. In the kitchen, while coffee perked, he told her about the committee's worries. Some folks think it'll be too much, you being there, he said, watching her curl on the rug, like reopening something that's finally scabbed over. She blinked slowly, then laid her chin on her paws, eyes tracking him as he moved. There was a stiffness when she rose now, a slight hitch in one hind leg, but once she got going, the old purpose returned to her stride. Time had worn her down, not erased her. At night, he woke more than once to the sound of her shifting in the dark, the soft exhale that used to come from the living room years ago. The familiarity of it both comforted and unsettled him. Each noise pulled up memories, head packed away like folded uniforms in a box. Saturday evening, he stood alone in the chapel, the lights low. The flag finally unfolded across the box. The stars faced his right hand the way they had on that other day in his kitchen. His chest tightened, and he had to lean on the back of the front pew to steady himself. Grace lay at the aisle's edge, watching him. When he pressed his palm to the flag's corner, she rose slowly and came forward. touching her nose to the cloth. She drew in a breath through her nose, long and deliberate, then let it out in a small huff that sounded like acknowledgement. "They're afraid," he said to her quietly, "afraid of feeling it all again. Truth is, so am I." He rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the knot there. "I lost you both once. Letting you walk into this tomorrow feels like inviting that loss to sit right beside me." Her gaze held his for a moment, then drifted to the box. Years ago, Daniel had laughed as he taught her a special cue, a hand signal that meant speak and another that meant quiet. She had learned them quickly, delighted to find her voice welcome in certain moments. Frank remembered standing in the hallway once, listening as his son practiced. "One bark for 'im here," Daniel had said. "Two if something's wrong." Grace had obliged, tail wagging, proud of her new role. That memory surfaced now with a clarity that made his heart ache. The family arrived before dusk to go over the program. Daniel's old unit photo sat in a frame on the front table, surrounded by candles. His sister traced his face with a fingertip. "We thought she was gone," she whispered when she saw Grace. "I dreamed of her lying by his boots." Questions filled the room. Would Grace be too much? Would her presence be a comfort or a blow? In the end, the decision seemed to settle not on words, but on the way his mother's hands trembled when she reached out and touched the old collar, eyes shining. "He would want her here," she said. That night, back home, Frank sat at the edge of his bed, turning Daniel's last letter over in his hands. It said all the kind, careful things such letters say, but there had always been a weight beneath the lines, something unsaid that had lodged in his chest like a stone. Tomorrow, he feared, might make that stone heavier or finally show him how to set it down. Sunday morning dawned cold and clear, the kind of blue sky day that felt almost impolite at times like these. The parking lot filled slowly, tires crunching on gravel, doors closing softly. People spoke in low voices, hands tucked in coat pockets, scarves pulled tight against the chill. Inside, the chapel glowed with the kind of light only winter can make, thin but insistent, slanting through coloured glass. The flag lay smooth over the box now, stars aligned, stripes flowing toward the floor. Candles flickered along the side walls, their small flames steady. Grace sat beside Frank's pew at the front, collar newly cleaned, an old leash looped loosely in his hand, more for appearances than need. Her body pressed against his leg, radiating warmth. Her eyes roamed the room, pausing on each face that passed, as if checking them off a list only she knew. When the honour guard stepped forward, boots in precise rhythm, Her ears twitched. The folded flag they carried to the front decades ago had felt like a full stop. This one, draped over the box, felt more like a comma, a pause in an unfinished sentence. The thought surprised him. Speeches began. Stories of Daniel's humour, his stubbornness, his way of watching over the younger ones in his unit like a big brother. People chuckled softly, wiped at their eyes, nodded. The chaplain spoke of service and sacrifice, of promises made beneath different skies. Through it all, Grace remained still, eyes never straying far from the flag. Once, when the bell outside chimed the hour, she glanced toward the door, then back again, as if confirming that all the important things were here. Her breathing rose and fell, a rhythm he could feel through his trouser leg. Then came the moment that had sat like a stone in his stomach all week. The chaplain invited the family to stand. As they rose, the room fell into a silence so complete that every rustle of fabric sounded loud. Somewhere in the back, a baby whimpered and was quickly soothed. Beside him, Grace shifted her weight. A tremor ran through her body, not of fear but of gathering. She took one slow step forward, then another, until she stood directly in front of the flag-draped box. Her nose hovered above the cloth, drawing in the scent once more, chest expanding. Without any cue from him, she lifted her head. One sharp, hoarse bark broke from her throat, echoing off the rafters. It wasn't loud enough to be alarming, but in that held-breath room, it was unmistakable, cutting cleanly through every layered emotion and drawing all eyes. Frank's heart seized for a second. His hand shot toward her collar, but the look on her face stopped him. It wasn't wild or confused. It was focused. The same expression Shed worn when Daniel gave that old speak signal years ago. This was not a random sound. It was an answer. A murmur ran through the pews. The chaplain paused, hands resting on the podium. Daniel's sister pressed her hand to her mouth, tears spilling. Their mother stepped forward, fingers trembling, and laid her palm on Grace's head. "One bark," she whispered, voice breaking. "One for I'm here." The officer who had brought the first folded flag cleared his throat. "There was something we never knew where to place," he said quietly, stepping closer to the box. A small tin from his belongings. "Head mentioned it once," said Shed no. "We never understood." He looked at the family. "We put it at his side." Frank felt his chest tighten as memory rewound to that hallway practice. One bark for presence, two for warning. Grace stood poised, ears forward, gaze steady on the box as if waiting. Slowly, with a nod from the family, the officer lifted the lid just enough to reach in. His hand emerged with a small, scuffed metal tin. When he opened it, the faint scent of paper and time drifted out. Inside lay a stack of folded notes, each with a name written on the outside. One bore Frank's own name, in his son's looping handwriting, heavier and more personal than the official letterhead already read. The room faded as he took it. Around him, people blurred into colour and shape. Grace sat down beside him again, leaning her weight into his leg with quiet insistence. The bark still hung in the air, not as disruption, but as a doorway opening onto words long delayed. In that moment, everything in the room tilted gently toward a different ending than the one Head carried alone. Life after the service did not change all at once. Grief rarely gives up its ground quickly. But something subtle had shifted, like a window cracked open in a stuffy room. The tin's notes, read slowly over coffee and long afternoons, filled in spaces the official letter had left untouched. Daniel's words were messy and unguarded, written in foxholes and bunkhouses, on the backs of old forms. To his father, he confessed fears Head softened before, explained choices without trying to justify them, and, most of all, thanked him for the quiet things: a packed lunch, a ride to the recruiter, a patient ear. There were lines about Grace scattered throughout, too. How she steadied his breath on nights the memories came too close. How Head imagined, if anything happened, the two of them keeping an eye on each other back home, trading watch shifts in a small town house with a sloping porch. "Guess we took the long way around," Frank murmured, scratching behind Grace's ear as she leaned against his chair. The tin now sat on the end table, not hidden away but not displayed like a relic either. It had become part of the room, like the lamp and the threadbare quilt. Sundays found them both at the chapel, early as always. Only now, the people who arrived nodded to Grace as naturally as they greeted the ushers. Children reached out tentative hands, which she accepted with patient stillness, tail making small, dignified sweeps on the floor. Between services, she had claimed a spot beneath a stained glass window where the light fell gentle in late morning. There, her fur took on colours from the glass soft blues, muted reds. Sometimes, as he watched her doze in that kaleidoscope glow, he felt a calm settle over him in places where only ache had lived. They developed new habits without quite noticing. A walk along the riverside path after supper, her gait slowing a little more each season. A stop at the Veterans Hall on Thursday evenings, where she made her rounds, accepting rough pats from hands that had once held rifles and steering nervous younger shoulders toward conversation. People started calling her the Chapel Girl or Grace from Maple Street, and stories spread. How she had barked just once at the right moment. How that sound had led to words that made hardened men wipe their eyes in public without shame. It became part of local law, told over coffee refills. Frank, for his part, found himself less haunted by what-ifs. The letter from the tin did not erase loss, but it untangled it. He no longer replayed his parting words with Daniel on an endless loop, searching for sentences he should have said. Instead, he heard his son's own final say, clear and specific. On quiet afternoons, he and Grace sat on the chapel steps, watching small-town life move past. Teens on bikes, couples from the diner, the mail truck he no longer drove. The big flag by the road flapped lazily in the breeze, its shadow falling sometimes over them both. Inside his chest, the old stone of guilt had worn smooth. It was still there, grief doesn't vanish, but it no longer jabbed with every breath. When the bell tolled now, it sounded less like a reminder of what he had lost and more like an invitation to be present for what remained. As winter melted into a softer season, tiny green shoots pushed up beside the chapel path. Grace stopped to sniff each one with the same seriousness she gave to everything. Watching her, Frank smiled to himself. This, he realized, was another kind of service. Showing up, day after day, for the quiet work of living on. Years have a way of slipping past when marked by small routines rather than big occasions. Before he knew it, the sharp lines of that particular Sunday had softened into memory, edges rounded by retellings and the daily press of ordinary days. Still, some moments stayed bright. On certain mornings, when the sky over the pines turned the colour of a well-worn flag, faded but dignified, Frank would find Grace already sitting by the door, ears perked. Her joints no longer cooperated quickly, but anticipation lent her a little extra spring when he reached for the leash. Their path rarely varied now. Down Maple Street, where the neighbours waved from porches cluttered with flower pots and wind chimes, past the diner, from which the smell of bacon and biscuits drifted, making both their stomachs rumble, across the quiet intersection to the chapel lot, gravel crunching underfoot. Inside, she moved with familiarity born of countless Sundays. She checked the front pew where the family had once sat, then the corner where the tin had lain after that first reading, then her spot beneath the stained glass. Only after making that small circuit would she settle, sighing deeply. The flag outside had been replaced once since that day, the old one folded and gifted to the family. Still, whenever the new fabric snapped in a sudden gust, Grace's ears flicked toward the sound. It was as if some part of her kept that detail filed away, ready should anyone need reminding. Frank found himself speaking to Daniel in the present tense more often now. Not because he expected an answer, but because the conversations felt unfinished in a peaceful way rather than a painful one. You'd laugh at how she runs the place. He'd say, watching Grace supervise the usher, setting bulletins. There were no grand finales in their shared days. No dramatic rescues or last-minute revelations. Instead, there were evening walks bathed in the orange wash of streetlights, the soft brush of fur against his leg when the wind picked up, the steady presence beside his chair as the news murmured in the background. Sometimes, while sweeping the aisle, he would pause and simply listen. The chapel still talked after dark wood stretching, glass sighing, but now those sounds blended with Grace's familiar rhythms. The soft click of her nails, the gentle wheeze that came with her age, the flutter of her breath as she dreamed. He knew, of course, that time would one day carry her beyond his reach as it had Daniel. Yet the thought did not hollow him out the way it once might have. Their years together, interrupted and then resumed, felt complete in a way that didn't depend on how long they lasted. On the anniversary of the service, the town gathered again. There was no flag-draped box this time. Only a wreath at the base of the pole and a few words spoken in the cool morning air. Grace lay at Frank's feet, eyes half closed, ears turning toward each familiar voice. When the bell rang, a breeze stirred, lifting the edge of the flag. Grace raised her head, considered the fluttering cloth, and then, satisfied, settled back down. No bark was needed now. The message shed carried that first day had already done its work, echoing quietly in the lives around them. That evening, as they walked home under a sky soft with stars, Frank looked down at the silvered head beside him. "We're all right," he said aloud, more to himself than to her. She bumped his knee with her shoulder as if in agreement, their steps falling into easy rhythm on the sidewalk. In the small house on Maple Street, the lights glowed warm behind curtains. Inside, a tin sat on an end table, a collar hung by the door, and an old man eased into his chair while a faithful companion curled nearby. The world outside spun on with its noise and hurry. Here, in this quiet pocket, the legacy of one bark at a flag-draped box lived on in the simple, steady miracle of shared company and the peace of a heart finally learning to rest. If this story touched your heart, drop a simple 1 in the comments to let us know you were here. Your support keeps these gentle stories alive. Don't forget to subscribe and stay with us, because the next story might just be the one that finds you when you least expect it.